My wife and I have been married for a little over 20 years. I am 42 years old. We are happy and have two teenage children, Darcy, who is 17, and David, who is 15. I had already graduated from college, and Macy was in her senior year when we got married. I'm an engineering manager at a mid-sized engineering firm in the city, and Macy is a paralegal at a large law firm. We are both active and healthy. We spend at least an hour in the gym several times a week. We also love being outdoors and often go hiking when the weather permits. I'm John Hopper. My height is 180 centimeters, and my weight is about 82 kilograms. I'm not going to tell you that I'm some kind of super stud, but I can please my wife when we make love often. This usually happens about 2 to 3 times a week. Macy is about 170 centimeters tall, has a C-cup chest, a flat stomach, and a nice curve in her hips. Overall, she is still very attractive. Heads turned to her every time we went out somewhere, especially if she was dressed to the nines. My children were wonderful. They were well-adjusted, got good grades, and enjoyed some popularity at their school. They have been the greatest joys in my life, along with my beautiful wife. I rarely missed one of their games or school performances. I actively participated in their extracurricular activities, helped them with their homework, and took them hiking and camping on the weekends. As an engineering manager, I largely delegated the actual engineering responsibilities to my employees, so I didn't have to work overtime or on weekends. Travel was minimal, just to conferences once or twice a year. Macy sometimes had to work overtime when she was working on a big case, but it really wasn't that much. Okay, that pretty much sums up our lives. Obviously, if that was all there was, it would be a pretty boring story. Storm clouds were gathering, which I did not pay attention to. They came in the form of a brash young lawyer who was hired by the law firm where my wife worked. His name was Brandon Howard. He was a big guy, 190 centimeters tall, and weighing about 95 kilograms. He exercised a lot to relieve stress from work, so he was not overweight. He was self-confident, brash, and arrogant. Moreover, he was constantly lonely. I first met him at one of my wife's work events. He continuously flirted with her all evening. She even flirted back a little as I stood there. When I expressed my displeasure, she told me to grow up and that it was completely harmless. As soon as we got home, I tried to explain to her that, although I trusted her completely, my problem was that it was completely disrespectful of her to flirt with another man right in front of her husband. I don't think she fully agreed with me that she had behaved inappropriately, but she at least acknowledged my concerns. It took another day or two before everything returned to normal. Life continued for another 6 months. Macy was working on a major case that had been going on for about 2 years. It was finally coming to an end. She started working long hours. I know what you're thinking right now, and no, she wasn't fooling me. It was a legitimate matter, and we discussed it thoroughly. She also called home at least once every evening to make sure everything was okay. There were also several other people working late, as I learned later. Although they weren't actually having an affair, the flirting still continued and even intensified. The case was finally settled in favor of a client of my wife's firm. To celebrate, one of the senior partners rented a cabin about 4 hours away in the mountains. He invited everyone who worked on the case for a weekend with their significant other. I knew my partner quite well, and we had actually been to the cabin a few times before. As I already said, the children were 15 and 17 years old. They were quite responsible and at the age where they could take care of themselves. We decided to leave them home alone rather than leaving them with my wife's parents. Yes, I warned them against any bad behavior. With that decision made, Macy and I packed our bags and left on Friday afternoon. We reached the cottage in the early evening and carried our bags to the room we were to use. Other than having to put up with Brandon flirting with my wife all evening, it was pretty enjoyable. After telling my wife how unhappy she was about continuing to flirt with Brandon, I decided to just leave her alone and chat with Charles and Louise, the owners of the cottage. Like I said, I liked Chuck and Lou as they preferred to be called in casual settings. We had quite a lot of similar interests. After dinner and sitting around the fire on the back deck, it was late. So I picked up my wife to put her to bed. I was actually very tired and still a little angry with my wife, so I moved away from her and went asleep. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. Macy was still asleep next to me, so I quietly got out of bed, put on shorts and a t-shirt, and then went in search of the wake-up juice. I walked into the kitchen to find Chuck and Lou busy preparing a large breakfast. Taking my coffee, I walked over and started helping. It was quite a production because, besides Chuck and Lou, there were two other couples there. My wife and I, and Bron George, another lawyer, who was here with his wife, and Kathy was another paralegal who brought her husband, James. Eventually, everyone managed to get into the kitchen just as breakfast was starting. By the time I picked up my plate and headed to the table, I found Brandon had taken my seat next to my wife. "Sorry, but you were sitting in my place," I said kindly. "Oh, honey, we're in the middle of a conversation. Could you sit over there, please?" Macy replied. "Just now?" I asked. "But dear, I was a little busy helping. I was looking forward to sitting and chatting with my wife over breakfast. Everything will be fine, just this once. After all, we can talk all the time, but I rarely get to interact with my colleagues outside the office." I was truly stunned. I decided that I really wasn't hungry after all, so I took my plate and put it on the counter. After refilling my cup of coffee, I walked out onto the back deck and sat alone as I analyzed what had just happened. I remembered the expressions on several other faces when it happened. Something was going on here, and I had the distinct impression that I would not be happy with the outcome. As the day progressed, things didn't go so well. Macy spent most of her time next to Brandon. The only time she really spent with me was when we were both hanging out with other people. She was walking with Brandon when we went camping, we went swimming in the lake, and she spent time with Brandon. I was able to remind her several times that she was my wife and not Brandon's girlfriend. She just laughed it off and said that my imagination was running wild. By the time dinner was finished, I was fed up. When we went out onto the terrace to enjoy the evening and have a drink, my timing was perfect. My wife had just sat down, and as Brandon started to sit down next to her, I moved and pushed him out of the way with my hip as I sat down. Macy was unhappy. She gave me one of her annoyed looks. I simply smiled back and took her hand. She tried to pull it away, but I just squeezed harder, refusing to let go. Instead, she practically refused to talk to me. It was quite an unpleasant couple of hours, as everyone else felt the tension. I had finally had enough. This weekend turned into a complete disaster. I apologized, explaining that I was tired from the day's activities and got up to go to bed. I went into the kitchen to refresh my drink. My plan was to pack before bed, so I wouldn't be rushed the next morning before heading home. I'm just twisting the cap on a bottle of bourbon when Macy entered. "John, I need to talk to you for a minute before you go to bed," she said. "Well, Macy," I replied, "I'm kind of surprised by this. We had the whole day to talk, but you preferred to talk to everyone except me. In fact, you talked to Brandon almost nonstop, but you barely said a word to your husband." At least she had the decency to blush. "Yes, well, you see, I need to explain this," she continued. "This should be interesting," I thought. "First of all, I need you to understand that I have never cheated on you, ever. Judging by the way you acted this weekend, I'm not so sure this is true," I said. "Okay, Brandon and I flirted a little, but that's about it. He never even really touched me, other than to help me overcome a few obstacles during our hike today. Now, as I said, I was completely faithful to you, and it would never even occur to me to cheat on you. But there are no buts in this. That's why I'm here, talking to you now. I have to admit that there is quite a strong sexual attraction between Brandon and I. The flirting we were doing led to some sexual tension. That's why I need to tell you that I will spend the night with him. I needed to tell you and be honest, so it wouldn't be cheating. I'm not going to go behind your back. No, what I said, no. I'm not going to let that happen. Look, I've already made my decision on this matter. There's just so much sexual tension between us that I have to do this and see what it is. It's just this one time. And then when we get home tomorrow, I'll be all yours again. Let me be completely clear. I won't accept this. I won't approve of this. If you go through with this, there will be dire consequences. I don't will stand behind this, baby. If you really love me, you'll let me do this one time. Baby, if you really love me, you wouldn't even ask for this. Heck, you wouldn't even think about it. John, I really need to do this. This is just one time. Then I will come back and be completely faithful to you again. Macy, do you remember our wedding vows, especially the part about leaving everyone else? Moreover, Since you feel the need to break this vow that you freely made in front of God and in front of all our friends and family, why should I believe this promise made quietly without witnessing? Is it okay, John? I can see you're angry about this now. I really need to do this, so I'll see you in the morning. We can discuss this tomorrow on the way home. With these words, she turned and went back out into the street. Just like that, 20 years of a happy marriage were flushed down the toilet. She expected me to be a faithful husband and wait for her to fly back into my open arms the next morning. I don't work like that. We discussed this several times. More than one of our friends cheated on their spouse, and we talked about it. We didn't have passes to the treason hall. Cheating was a deal breaker. And I don't care if she told me first. Deception is not just going behind the back of someone else. The very act of having sex with someone else is cheating. I poured my drink into the sink. I didn't need another one for what I was going to do. I went up to the room and collected all my things. I left Macy's things as is. She could take care of her own. Having turned off the light in the room, I sat on the bed and waited. An hour passed before I heard everyone return to the house and go to their rooms. I waited another half hour to make sure everyone was either asleep or otherwise distracted. Taking my bag, I quietly left the room and closed the door. I managed to get out into the street almost silently. Luckily, my car was parked furthest away. It was a fairly new car, so when I started it and drove off, it was quiet. It was just after 2 a.m. when I pulled up to our house. I noticed that the light was on, so it was obvious that at least one of the children was still awake. Sighing, I walked out, grabbed my bag, and went inside. Of course, both children stayed up and watched the movie. I thought to myself, "Hello, Father," one of them said. "What are you doing here?" "I didn't think you'd be back before tomorrow. Later today," Darcy noticed. "Yes, where is Mom?" David added. "Well, by answering David's question, I can answer both questions," I said. "Your mother is still at the cottage, in her lover's bed. Yes, I'm an ass for dragging our kids into personal matters between their mom and me. But I thought being honest with them would prepare them for the changes to come. Okay, maybe I could have at least been more diplomatic about it, but I didn't feel much remorse at the time. What does 'in your lover's bed' mean? Is your mom really cheating on you?" Darcy almost screamed. "That's exactly what I meant," I replied. "She cornered me this evening and told me she was going to sleep with someone else tonight. I decided I didn't want to wait for this, so I packed my things and returned home. I let her lover drive her home. I didn't think that I would have to wait for her somewhere nearby." We talked some more, then I took my bag to the spare room. I spent the next hour moving all my things from the room we used to share into what would now be my room. Luckily, the guest room was a second master bedroom with its own bathroom. The bed was also quite comfortable. As soon as my things were moved, I fell onto the bed and fell into an exhausted sleep. I woke up a few hours later to my phone ringing. Looking at him, I noticed that it was my wife calling. I sent it to voicemail. Looking closer, I saw that she had left half a dozen text messages, and this was her third call. Just for fun, I read the messages and listened to the voicemail. The first were her curious questions about where I had been and that breakfast was almost ready. Then they became concerned about where I was. The ones that were later were angry, demanding to know where I was and demanding that I get my ass back there so they could pick it up and take it home. The latter told me that she had to get someone to give her a ride and that she would kick my ass as soon as she got home. Well, I was already awake, so I had to get up and get ready to face the new day. Hurricane Macy would arrive in about 4 hours, and I needed to prepare for the storm. I had a feeling she would be angry. There was no remorse in the last message she left. I got up, showered, got dressed, and headed downstairs for breakfast. By the time I finished eating, the children were already up. I explained to them that they should probably stay out of the crossfire since their mother was not in a very good mood. Surprisingly, they just laughed at it. I had a bad feeling about what would happen when she returned home. They didn't seem too happy with what she did. "Where the hell are you?" The slam of the door announced the arrival of Miss Congeniality. What the hell was the idea of leaving me there like this? Do you have any idea how humiliating it was for me this morning when everyone found out you left, and I had to beg for a drive home? You bastard! I was going to pull you into bed today and have sex, but now you can just forget about it. I simply smiled back at her. In fact, I was amazed at the composure I showed her. "First of all, dear, I don't care how humiliating you may think it is. Trust me, it wasn't nearly as humiliating as it was for me when you jumped into bed with that boyfriend and everyone knew it. Secondly, I have absolutely no interest in ever having sex with you again. Now you're damaged goods. Do you really think I would take you after your boyfriend lover was there? How can you talk to me like that? I am your wife. No, that's not true. Well, you may still be that way on paper, but in reality, my wife disappeared sometime yesterday. You're just a cheating husband. What are you talking about? We discussed this last evening. I told you this in advance, so I didn't lie. Okay. Let me ask you a couple of questions. First, last night, did you sleep with someone who was not your husband? Yes. I told you I was going to bed with Brandon. Second, did you have sex with him? Of course I did. It's why do you think I went to bed with him then? It's okay because you allowed yourself to be unfaithful by someone other than your husband. You cheated. End of story. It doesn't matter whether you told me about it or not. In fact, you didn't even ask. You said you had already made your decision and that I had no say. I even told you not to do this. I told you that I am completely against this. You just went ahead and did it anyway. But if you really love me, you will let me do this. If you really love me, we can get through this. You stupid asshole, if you really loved me, you would never even think about sleeping with that bastard. With that, I turned and went into the garage to work on my 1969 Nova. Initially, it was an ordinary 6-cylinder engine with a 3-speed manual transmission. I replaced the engine with a 383 subcompact, and the transmission was now a 4-speed Borg Warner Super T10. Yes, I know many new gearheads are tempted by installing a newer, computer-controlled motor. Of course, they get more power and better fuel economy. I'm old school. I hate all this computer-controlled stuff. It takes a computer genius just to keep this stupid thing running. With the old engine, I can screw it in, plug it in, and it will work. This is newer. You screw it in, plug it in, install the computer controller, then take it somewhere else and pay the guy another $1,000 to set it up before you launch it. No thanks. Over the next few months, Mac tried to get me to talk. I wasn't interested in that. She also tried to come into my room several times late at night. I changed the locks, and she didn't have the key to me. We were now just platonic housemates who happened to have 2 children together. Why didn't I just divorce her? Children. I didn't want to just be a part-time dad. I loved my children and wanted to be close to them. Besides, I only had 3 years left before David would graduate and go to college. Macy tried to get the kids involved to get me to talk to her. Nothing good came of this. The kids were seriously pissed off about what she did. She tried to confront me, to turn them against me. It was Darcy who set her on the right path. Mother, Dad never told us anything bad about you. You, on the other hand, have complained to us about him several times. Don't blame Dad for turning us against you. You did it yourself. Yes, there were sad times in the Hopper family. After 4 months, Macy began to wear very little clothing around the house when the children were not around. She started wearing very sexy lingerie to try to lure me into her bed or into my bed, whatever works for me. I have to admit, it was hard to resist at times. After all, she is a very sexy woman. However, I was determined. I simply could not get past her betrayal. I need you to come to bed and make love to me. Well, it was an ultimatum. I looked at her and said, just don't bring them here. I will not tolerate you bringing any of your lovers into my home. Go to their home, motel, or even the back seat of their car, but don't bring them here. A depressed expression appeared on her face, then she turned and ran out of the room sobbing. Choices have consequences. I don't want anyone else. I just want you. I heard her sobbing as she ran out of the room. You might be wondering why I didn't take the opportunity to just take her after all. She is a very beautiful woman, and it has been 6 months since I had sex with her. Well, it's true, and I gave in to temptation. The problem was that I simply could not accept the fact that she had willingly humiliated me in front of her coworkers. Every time I tried to think about having sex with her, all I could imagine was her coworkers laughing at me as she lay on his bed having sex with him. Pictures of their copulation and sexual scenes passed through my imagination. I lost all desire for her. Sure, she was beautiful on the outside, but all I could see was the ugliness inside of her. This was a week later, Saturday evening. I was relaxing in the living room, drinking scotch and soda, and reading a book. Macy came down the stairs and stood in front of me. She was wearing an LBD, jeans, stockings, 12 CFM heels, and her expensive jewelry. Her hair and makeup were done to perfection. She looked like she was ready to go to one of the most luxurious holiday parties we usually went to together. "John, I need you. I want you. I beg you. Please take me upstairs and take me. I can't take it anymore." "So, if you're not going to take me, I'll go find someone who will," she said. "I told you last week that I would do it if you said no. This is your last chance. Please don't make me walk out that door." "You look very cute," I answered. "I have no doubt that you will find someone to spend the night with. Just be ready, because if you take someone else, I'll take that as your permission for me to do it too. If you walk out that door and have sex with another person, I would view it as an open marriage in which we are both free to have sex with other people." "Damn it, John. This is not what I want. I willingly offer myself to you, but you continue to refuse me. I don't want sex with other people. I'm damn sure I don't want you to screw other women. You're driving me to this. It's not the same thing. If you don't need me anymore, why don't you just divorce me? Do you want this? Do you want me to divorce you?" "Damn it, no. I want you to take me as your devoted wife again. You weren't very loyal to me in the hut, so why should I expect you to be loyal to me now?" "Because I promised to be, and a little over 20 years ago, you vowed to be the same. What makes you think I can trust any of your promises now?" "Wonderful. If this happens, don't wait. If you go and cheat another woman, I'll divorce your ass so fast you won't even know what hit you." She started crying again. "What do you want from me? How long are you going to punish me? What can I do to make you love me again?" Again, she burst into tears. "There is absolutely nothing you can do. You've already done it once and done you with another man and humiliated me in front of your friends. As for what I want from you, I want to coexist in this house as roommates for the next 3 years. Once David turns 18, graduates from high school, and goes to college, we will divorce and go our separate ways. Until then, we will live in the same house and raise our children together. If you want to divorce me before then, go ahead. I can't stop you. Just keep in mind that the kids will most likely want to live with me. This means that I will stay here in the house, and you will pay child support." "Macy, I just can't trust you anymore. I can't live with the thought of my wife having sex with someone else every time she's not home. I can't live with the thought of the next time you break your promise to be faithful. Here, I have only 2 options. The first is to divorce you now, and then the children will have 2 parents who spend part-time with them. Another option is to live in the same house where we both will have freedom, but the children will be in a 2-parent household. We will live in the same house, but we will be divorced in all respects except on paper. You are free to date as much as you want, just like me. We just won't bring anyone home with us." She actually went out that evening after washing her face and putting on her makeup, as promised. I also started dating other women after a month. She seemed resigned to her fate. We were polite to each other and basically lived as platonic roommates while we raised our kids. We acted like a family when one of us had a party. We usually went together. I had to maintain this farce in public, of course. It didn't take long before all our colleagues realized what was happening. Heck, I dated several single women in my office, as did she with some of the guys she worked with. Yes, she constantly tried to lure me into her bed, but I mostly refused. Okay, of course, I gave in to her a couple of times. She was still a beautiful woman, and after a couple of drinks, I let my little head make a decision. I always wore a condom with her, and it was sex, not lovemaking. "So is that all?" Macy said, with tears in her eyes. "This is all," I replied, as I loaded another box into my truck. "Thank you for 20 wonderful years, Macy. It was 23 years ago." "I know," I continued. Tears welled up in her eyes again. "A little over 3 years have passed. David has just moved into his dorm for college. Darcy was about to start her first year at the university. The house was sold, and we were packing to move out. We went in different directions. The divorce had already begun, and we were simply biding our time until the final decision was made. The assets were divided 50-50ths, and the kids' college bills were already fully funded. "I still love you, you know," she whispered. "I know," I replied. "I'm sorry." "Me too," she said, turning to look at me, tears streaming down her cheeks. Will you call me sometimes? Come see me sometimes? Maybe we can meet from time to time, please? No commitment, just to see each other. My hatred for what she did has long since dissipated. I no longer felt the same love, but I didn't despise it either. In fact, I saw her as something of a friend. Besides, we were still connected by our children. Honestly, she was damn good in bed. Certainly, we can do it, I agreed. In addition, we will have children's birthdays, graduations, weddings, and grandchild births that we will both attend. The children forgave Macy for what she did, and their relationship improved but never returned to what it was before. Macy bought a small 3-bedroom apartment, so her children could visit her when they came to town. I bought a small house with a couple of hectares of land and a workshop. It was a pretty small town, so we still dated occasionally. I called her, and she called me. We even went somewhere together a few times. No, we never had a chance to get back together, although she tried. Each of us met quite often. She ended up having several fairly long-term relationships. I was just content to be single. I decided I'd had enough of being exceptional. For me, there are 2 reasons to be married. The first is to have and raise children. I had done it before and was too old to do it again. Another reason was the desire to grow old together and have a companion in their old age. It didn't really matter to me. I had a lot of friends and family. If I got lonely, I had a very big request to ask of John. I have a very big request to ask of you, she said. I understand if you don't want to do this, but I would really like you to at least think about it. We had lunch at a good restaurant. 5 years have passed since the divorce. Ask right away, I assumed. You needed something when you invited me to lunch today. By the way, where's your boyfriend? Won't he be upset that you invited your ex-husband to lunch? She smiled. No, he knows everything about our past. He knows he has nothing to worry about. Besides, it was he who suggested that I ask you in private. He thought it might be more uncomfortable if you were here. However, he is willing to take your call if you want to make sure he agrees with this request. Fine, you got me interested. John Martin proposed to me, and I agreed, she said. Fine, you love him. Have you finally passed us by? I will never completely forget us, John. However, I have come to terms with it. As for Martin, I feel comfortable with him. I really love him, and we have a great time together. I've settled down and plan to spend the rest of my life with him. Okay, so what do you want to ask for? If this is my blessing, then you have it, although you don't really need it. I have no say in this matter. No, well, I guess that's kind of true. But what I want is for you to walk me down the aisle and marry me off at the wedding. What? I want you to walk me down the aisle and marry me off at my wedding, Macy. Most ex-wives don't even want their ex-husbands to be present at their new marriages, let alone actually participate in the ceremony. Yes, I'm aware of this. Then why, in the name of all that is holy, do you even think this is a good idea? Fine, listen to me. I've obviously discussed this with Martin, and he agrees with it. I just sat there, dumbfounded, as she explained her train of thought. After listening to her, I had to admit that it made some sense in a really strange way. John, you were the most important man in my life, with the exception of my father. As you know, he is no longer alive. Moreover, you were the last significant relationship in my life. I could talk David into giving me away, but it just doesn't seem right for my son to give away his mother. It's like I belong to my son. I just think it sounds a little weird. Instead, my heart belonged to you for most of my adult life. You were the last man who owned any part of me. Martin and I think it would be appropriate if the last man who held my heart gave that heart to a new man. After all, even if you still have a piece of my heart, it's obvious that you don't necessarily want to keep it. This would be a great way to show that you are giving her up and handing her over to someone else who will care for her and protect her. I think the symbolism of this would show that we are still friends, but our love is completely over, and my new husband is now taking it upon himself. Yes, that sounds crazy to me too. I actually called Martin. I actually met him that evening for a few drinks at a local bar. He also liked the idea, of course. He was skeptical when Macy first brought it up, but after listening to her reasoning and discussing it fully, he liked it. I still wasn't convinced. I just thought there was too much weirdness in it. I also called my kids to get their thoughts on it. Who is marrying this woman? Her family and her ex-husband do it? Yes, it just sounded wrong on several levels, but it's what she wanted. I have to admit that it seemed to work. I was passing the baton to her new man. I truly felt like our relationship was finally over, and her new relationship was fulfilling. Of course, there were a few comments, but mostly they were received positively. It certainly made the reception a lot of fun. Several ladies approached me and asked if I wanted to start a new relationship since I had finally ended my previous one. I think that among these women, there may be 3 or 4 who could take a swing at me. Let's see. At least my weekends for the next month or 2 won't be boring.